Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. And that mission has led me to create the Become a Better Investor community, where you get access to tools you need to create, grow, and protect your wealth. Go to myworstinvestmentever.com right now to claim your spot. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz from A Stotz Academy, and I'm here with featured guest Lisa Gates. Lisa, are you ready to join the mission?
Oh my God, yes. Thank you for inviting me.
See, I told you I'm the worst.
Oh my God, your radio voice is the best, though. Keep it up.
I've been working on that. Got to bring more out of the stomach. You know, that's the key.
Yes, that's right. Your diaphragm.
We have a lady here that's a singing coach, and she always posts on her Instagram. She lives nearby here in Bangkok, and I just been thinking about I really need to go see her and try to figure out how I can continue to improve my radio voice.
I think you're doing just fine.
Let me introduce you to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Gates is a leadership coach and career story sleuth who helps women strategically self-advocate so they are seen, heard, valued, and paid. By building core narratives for every career context, from interviewing to networking to promotion, Lisa helps women capture the stories that demonstrate impact in action, with the goal of breaking through the barriers of invisibility and exclusion. With a career that spans from marketing and public relations to writing and acting, Lisa has become an expert at interviewing, pitching, negotiating, and storytelling. Woo, Lisa, take a minute and fill us in on what is the unique value that you are bringing to this wonderful world.
Wow, thank you. That's a great question to lead off with. Added value. I would say I would go all the way back in time to being a student in theater. I started out in journalism and then moved to theater. And as a part of that, I became really involved in improv groups. And that's in fact where my husband and I met. And we're still married after all this time. But
you're still improving it?
I think, yeah, we're still very much improving it. But I really think that it's that skill, that openness and the yes and skill that helps me help women in the moment, right? I help them get better on their feet, thinking on their feet, while also sort of backpedaling from that and being very strategic about how they ask for what they want, how they ask for resources, how they talk about themselves, and not being afraid to self-advocate. And I also think having kind of a big voice and a big presence myself, it helps them sort of emulate that. So I think that's in part what it might be that I deliver.
Yeah, in some ways, you know, you're causing a big wave and others can ride that wave of confidence and excitement and all that. So I can see that how that impact really brings a lot of people along. I was also thinking about, you know, when it comes to acting and theater and all that, what many people think, like I gave a presentation a while ago and someone came up to me and they said, that was an amazing presentation. And they asked me, you know, how many hours did you spend preparing that? And they couldn't imagine that I had spent probably 200 hours between my time and then doing it a few times, rewriting it, the team's time and bringing together the graphics and how we're doing it, talking about it, what's the impact, and, you know, I think that sometimes the improv or the ability to respond in a situation comes from practice and thinking about like what's important here, what am I trying to get at?
Yeah, totally. You know, that's the thing about improv and any discipline, creative or otherwise. Thousands of hours go into practice. So, you know, your 1 hour talk or whatever it was, your 2 hour workshop is actually years of intellectual property, right? Just years and years of it, so that somebody asks you a question and it might feel like a curveball to the rest of the audience, but it just, you dig into your resources and there it is.
Maybe we could just understand more for the audience to understand your core service that you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're doing it, and where they can learn more about that.
Well, my core service is Your Story Happens Here, storyhappenshere.com. And what I do is work with women one-on-one, and all the money people in the world will tell you need to go many, one to many. And that happens on LinkedIn Learning courses. But primarily what gets me out of bed in the morning is being able to work with women one-on-one, helping them sort of really go back and reinvestigate, because these are senior women, what their North Star is, what's to gain more clarity about who they are and where they're going, and then to put that in action by crafting, kind of controlling their narrative, what they say about themselves to others, and how they self-advocate, right? And often how they advocate for others on their team, or whatever it is. But so I do kind of a process with them that results in them having a string of narratives or statements, if you will, that they can say in different settings, anywhere from job interviews to negotiations, strategizing an important negotiation. And then also stories that back up their claim. So if I'm saying, hey, here are the top 5 things that I've done this year, and I want you to know I'm putting my hat in the ring for a promotion and a raise, but this is what I've delivered that's brought value to you this year. And the way we construct it is so that the recipient, the listener, asks, is compelled to ask another question. So in order to do that, I myself might need to, ask an open-ended question. What are your thoughts about that? What are the prospects of me getting a raise and promotion this year? So that question, that open-ended question, helps generate more conversation, and just teaching them those sort of conversational skills along with building these very scripted narratives. So it's kind of a combination of thinking on your feet, improv, but like we talked about before, much sort of investigation, planning, preparation, and then, the moment. So, yeah.
So many things that come to my mind when I was listening to you, like one of the things I was just talking to my mom lives with me here in Bangkok, Thailand, since my dad passed away about 6 years ago. And she's listening in, I'm sure. Mom, hi, Mom. Good morning.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah, there you go. And I was just telling her, I just kind of come to the conclusion that's like everybody is traumatized in one way or another from some certain thing to some degree. There's something that happened to everybody. And luckily for me, my trauma came, early in my life, and my parents basically forced me into treatment, and I went into drug rehab. And then I had great counselors that really forced me to look at my story, to look at my narrative, to look at how I felt about myself and, how I thought about myself. And it was brutal. I mean, it was literally almost 12 months, let's say about 10 months of treatment, 2,000 hours of time in group therapy and individual therapy, and a lot of time. But they helped me to reshape my narrative and my story about myself at a young age. Before that story had gotten ingrained into my, it just became a rut, before that. And then I was able to create the stories that, I started building the stories over the years as I traveled around the world and, did the things that I want. And I just think that sometimes when you're getting, as we get older, if you haven't done that work, it's so liberating to kind of go back and realize, okay, wait a minute, I've been in this rut, and this is the way I think about myself. This is the way I feel about it. It's nothing to do with anybody else. It's all about how I feel about myself. I felt inadequate. I felt like a loser. I felt like I was a weak person. I had to try to please everybody. I mean, I had all these things in my head. And, I just think that coming up with your story, looking at your past and then coming up with your story is such a powerful thing to overcome those narratives.
Wow, that's very powerful. And I'm sad, but I'm also glad that you had that experience, because it's now you've reframed it from a totally negative experience into something useful that's now helpful to yourself and others.
Mm.
So I mean, there isn't a person on the planet who comes to a coaching relationship or a therapy, well, of course therapy, but a coaching relationship without some block in the middle that's stopping them from getting where they are. And once they're aware of what it is, they can then reframe it. And I always tell people, you have to go through it to get past it. There's no shortcut for that. So your discomfort, let's say, in presenting your story to a group of people in the workplace, that fear is always going to be with you, but it's the story that needs unwinding so that you can tell a better story, so you can, the real story gets to show up.
Mm.
And so that's definitely a part of it. But I've also been doing, I don't know if you know what the moth is, but it's personal storytelling told live. And it's, I think it's 25 years old now, but there are shows on NPR and live shows all across the world, where people get up and tell true stories
Mm.
live. And I find that to be incredibly powerful, because but one of the things about it is that it's very difficult to tell a an important sort of life altering story with an end to it until you actually are at the end of that story. If you're still in the middle of it, it's not going to go well, right? You don't
That's
know
such
what
a
it's
great
about
point.
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, really
Um,
wonderful.
the other thing I was thinking about for the listeners out there, as you're trying to look at what is your story, sometimes, and that's particularly for younger listeners, they may be thinking, I don't know what my story is. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is ask people around you and ask them, what do you, and I remember asking my mother many years ago, I asked to my mom and dad, because I was reading a book and it said, ask people around you. So I asked, what is it that you like about me? Or what do you think is a good quality? And my mother, I can't remember if it's my mother or my father, but they said, that you're polite to everyone. And I
Wow.
thought, okay, there's positives and negatives. Part of that's my people pleasing, but on the other hand, I thought, that is a valuable characteristic that,
And empathy, compassion, that's really what they were
yeah,
seeing and hearing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I ask people in the beginning of trying to drive things down into who are you and what do you bring to the party. I ask people, what are you known for? What do you want to be known for? What are the things that you love doing, that bring value? And then what are the things that you're good at that you no longer want to do? Like you're just damn tired of that. You're not going to do it anymore. So it's just kind of a way of sort of opening everything up until we can get at, um, when they're writing this down, you can see all kinds of repeating themes and language and sort of phrases and tidbits to pull forward from all of that writing, that they don't necessarily see. So that becomes sort of me reflecting back what they've already expressed,
Mm.
and using all that sort of info and data to construct something that's compelling and true. Starting with a really good headline. I have, one of the things I also do is I coach cohorts of women in a program called Beyond Barriers. And these are groups of women from single organizations like, Salesforce or whoever, IBM. And part of that work is coming up with kind of a moniker or a tagline that you say about yourself. Like mine is helping women be seen, heard, promoted, and paid. Another woman, one of the founders of that program, is the MacGyver of the marginalized, right? It's just like this really quick, almost markety way, depending on how it's delivered, of saying what you do and who you are, what's important to you. There's a lot of value words you can hear in a statement like that.
Mm.
She's a diversity, equity, inclusion expert. So that's one of the benefits of doing this mining and self-exploration, is to come up with some really practical language for and immediately useful language for expressing yourself in any context.
Well,
So
an interesting word,
anyway,
mining, thinking about digging, um, you know, the challenge, digging and mining is, it takes effort. You got to go through that effort. I think that's part of the what you're talking about. I have one last thing I would share about this it's kind of interesting. What I do is I ask my students kind of all along, I ask them questions in my online courses. And those questions turn into kind of testimonials over time as they talk about, ask them, what was your transformation in this course? What was the main thing that you learned? And how would you describe the course to someone else and all that? I have more than 700 testimonials in one of my courses. And in my evaluation masterclass bootcamp, I've got probably, 300, 400 testimonials. So I had an intern work with me recently, and we took all those and we dumped them into a document, and then we started to group them. I just said, look, I'm not going to give you any feedback on anything. All I want you to do is go through these and group them. And he started coming up with these groups, and he ended up with 5 groups of kind of what they were talking about. And then those 5 groups became my 5 bullet points to my course.
Oh, exactly.
It's just totally voice of the customer. And then when I tell that bullet point, then, I have some support from a prior student. But that's been really helpful. And I really recommend for anybody that has online courses is constantly ask your audience, your students, what they're getting. And what I've learned is that I deliver a transformation through my valuation masterclass bootcamp. Every single student describes a transformation that they went through. And that is so building, strength in the area of valuing companies and transforming lives is really what we're doing there. But I just remember one last thing I would say about for those people that may feel a bit overwhelmed. Okay, yeah, it's digging. We got to go back and all that, but let's keep it simple too. Like, think about the positive things that people said to you. Like I said, my mom or dad said that I was polite to everyone. Or another one, this is one I just thinking and talking to you, I remember, we were getting feedback when I was a financial analyst at an investment bank, and I was writing research all the time, and I was a head of research, and I'd been doing it for many years. But I remember at one point there was a feedback from a client, and they said, I like how Andrew provides evidence for each point that he makes. And I just thought, okay, that's it. It describes me. I wasn't describing it, and I never really recognized it, but this person defined it. So by asking or listening to what people are saying about you, you can craft it. And so I built that into, I'm an evidence-based analyst.
Wow, that's great. That's great. That's such a good example. You're being reflected, right? And the work they're doing is showing up in what they say about themselves and you, right? So that's perfect. That's really social marketing, social selling, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, it's well, I just love the idea of helping people transform, and I know that's exactly what you're delivering. And when you work one-on-one, one of the beauties of working one-on-one is that it's like you can take already a beautiful moth or a caterpillar or whatever. What is it? A caterpillar? What is it that turns into a butterfly?
It turns into the butterfly. Yes.
Yeah. So, that's something that you don't see when you got a mass of students in a class and stuff like that. So I know that feeling. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have links in the show notes to all of your stuff and your website, as well as obviously for people that are on LinkedIn, make sure you go and follow Lisa there, because she's doing a lot on LinkedIn. Well, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstances leading up to it, and then tell us your story.
I think this should be called the podcast of pain. No, the painful podcast. Let's see. They'll think it's about, physical stuff. Well, it does, yeah. Okay, well, so my story is during our salad days, and somebody owed my husband some money, and I think it was something like $800. It wasn't a lot of money. It was then. It was a tragic amount of money.
Mm.
But so what? My husband came home and said, "Well, I got paid." And I went, "Oh, great!" And he goes, "Well, not in cash." He gave me a '65 Mustang. And we went, I was like, wait a minute, we need $800. What are you doing? So this 65 Mustang was really, a collector's dream, but it needed an engine. It had Bondo all over it. It was smooth, it was straight, but it had to be painted. It needed a fender, it needed a headliner and carpeting and new upholstery. And I was like, where in the hell, he said, look, we can sell this for, probably $20,000. And I went, only after we put $20,000 into it, right? I was livid. I was just livid. I just thought, this is a piece of garbage that's going to sit, I'm so sorry to car collectors, that's going to sit in our driveway for a while. So Charlie's father, my husband's father, dies, and we got a small inheritance, very small. Like, there were a lot of kids, so there was just not very much. I think it was something like $15,000, maybe 17. And of course, what do we start doing with that money? We start first, I have to say, researching who are the car guys, what do they know, where do you get stuff, who should do the work, can I do some of it by myself, how can I save money, all of that. So the $800 we never see, and then this $14,000 basically goes into the car, and it's beautiful by the end. And one day we're living in Los Angeles, and we decide to go to, it was downtown, the museum that's downtown. I always forget if it's MoMA or, anyway, we went to the museum, and we're driving home, and I ran into the back of someone and crunched the front end. And it was one day after we picked it up from the shop from being complete, right? Being all ready to go. And so we had to, do some more repair and spend more money. And I think when we finally sold that car, we sold it for 7,000, I want to say. So we almost, we didn't make our money back. But you know how that is, that lost money over time? What do you call that? Like, how you sort of do this accounting in your head?
Yeah, the
About,
compounding
like,
that could have compounded at X% and we'd be millionaires today.
yes, just like, and that was just like this horror story. And although I will say it was really fun to drive. It was. And we named her Sally, of course. So.
And can you remember the day that you got rid of it?
Yes. We were living in Seattle then, and it was snowing. And somebody came, and they, instead of driving it home, they hitched it up to the truck and towed it. And I can't remember much about the person. I think I was just so glad to get rid of it. It was like, good riddance.
And they paid you cash.
Oh, yes, they paid us cash.
So how would you describe the lessons that you learned from this?
Oh my God, it wasn't an investment at all. It was, how it was characterized to me was, this will be an investment because we make a small contribution to it and it will reap X rewards. And, after a while that started to make sense to me. But I think what I learned from this, if it isn't something that you naturally value or have an interest in, like if I were to collect musical instruments because it was a passion and I knew I was really good at analyzing the beauty and the patina and the age and all of that, that would be one thing. But I had no interest in cars, nor did my husband really. He didn't care. So I think it has to fit what your priorities are and what you're up to in your life. what you spend money on, or what you invest your time, resources, attention, money, all of it. And so this did not represent that, at all.
Mm.
I'm sure there might be
Well,
another
maybe I'll
layer.
share a couple of things I take away. I mean, one of the things is there's the concept of zero-based thinking, and we do it sometimes in, let's say, accounting and finance or something, where you say, how much marketing budget do you want this year? Well, last year we had $10 million, so this year I want $11 million. Well,
What's
what?
that based on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why not ask for $50 million? If we could generate $5 billion in revenue, or why not ask for 1 million, so zero-based thinking is trying to separate yourself from the situation. And I like to say, when you're in a situation like this, first thing you want to ask the question is that, if I wasn't in this situation, would I enter this situation?
That's it. That's really it. No, I wouldn't. Right. Or if somebody, even let's say nobody owed you money, and somebody came up to me and said, hey, you should really get into
Yeah.
the classic car restoration game. I would have run with my tail between my legs.
Yeah.
I was like, no,
No interest.
no interest,
Yeah.
none.
So that's
Real estate,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is, and Lisa, I've been single all my life, so I try to avoid giving any relationship advice. My father would be turning in his grave if he heard me give it. But I always say I only have one piece of relationship advice that I give, and it's just one question. And I always ask people the same one. And I say, you have to just give me a yes or no answer, and I won't, there's no more discussion. And I ask them, the question is, if you weren't knowing what you know about this person right now, you didn't know that at the beginning of the relationship, but you know it now. If you weren't in this relationship and this person walked up to you and wanted to start this relationship, would you start it? Yeah. And if the answer is no, then you've got some decisions to make. And if the answer is yes, you need to double down and bring more value to that relationship, and make that
I
commitment.
don't they call that sunk cost?
Sunk cost
Like
fallacy.
yeah, but also sunk cost reality is, regardless of that, I've come to love this person. But no, you're right. At the time, had that been sort of what was expressed to me, I would have thought, I'm not sure about this guy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And the other thing I take away is, what really happened was this person took their burden and transferred it onto you.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Can
so
I
for
tell
the
you
listeners
even
out there, and for the viewers, you've got to think, people are always trying to get their burden off of themselves. It's a natural
yeah,
reality. I'm trying to get my burdens off of myself, but sorry, I don't accept other people's burdens. Cash
yeah,
only, please.
yeah. This has an even worse ending to the story. I wasn't going to tell it, but I am. You could cut right there. Is that a friend of our family, a friend of my son's actually, his parents are very wealthy and were downsizing. They're in their 70s. And we right now have a Dodge Dart, a 68 Dodge Dart sitting out in front of our house that we are going to do nothing with except sell it. But we took their burden because they were downsizing and didn't know where to go. And my husband, being the nice guy that he is, accepted that burden. And so
Mm.
we're constantly jockeying that car around in the driveway, you know?
It it's
So we haven't learned anything, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
well, it sounds like this is a burden of space rather than a burden of,
Of
additional
money.
investment. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
it reminds me, my best friend is a guy named Dale, and he's in Thailand, and he basically runs a coffee factory that we have. But we've known each other since we were 14 years old, back in outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And I remember when I was a young guy and I was sober at the time, I was already kind of on my pathway of, having a great life and all that. And I was always the polite, nice guy. And then one time someone said something pretty strong to Dale, and Dale said to them, he said, if you have a problem with that, that's your problem. It's like, you can say that to someone? And it just
Yeah.
flipped my mind. And so I just want to challenge everybody, when somebody's having a problem with something, or when they're dealing with their burden and all that, that does not have to be yours, and you do not have to accept it.
You don't have to take it on. I have a saying that correlates with that. I say it's never about the other person, ever, even when it is. Right?
Totally. And if you go through treatment like I did in a lot of therapy, that's exactly what they're going to say. Yep, I understand. Yep, that person did you wrong, and all that, but that person's gone, but you're still sitting here.
Yeah.
And I also like the saying they said many years ago to me, which was, resentment rots the container it's in. So refeeling things that other people did and all that, I think a big lesson out of this story really is, how do you make sure that other people don't bring their burden into your life? Come on, we got enough burden in my own life. I don't need your burden. I can help, I can advise, but I'm not going to allow your burden to come into my life.
That is so beautiful. I just wrote it down. Resentment rots the container it's in. Who said that?
That was
a
one of my
friend
counselor
yours?
in my rehab hospital.
Ooh, that's powerful.
Yep. So let's now think about a young man or woman out there who's listening in, viewing, and they're basically facing the same situation: an uncle, a cousin, a brother, a sister. Now, there's another component to this that we didn't really hit, and that was that you were a secondary person in this. You weren't the primary person. It was a decision that your husband made. And then you had, so it's even a little bit more complicated, because think about that man or woman out there who said, oh, but my brother's about to do this, or my dad just did that, or whatever, so I'm connected with this. Or it could be that person's, in a similar situation. Based upon what you learn from this story and what you continue to learn in your life, what one action would you recommend that they take to avoid suffering the same fate?
I think it would be to grow your emotional intelligence by learning to ask questions before responding or accepting or saying yes. So, like, the question might have been, whose problem does this solve? Like the burden question, what I'm getting is, so by us accepting this car, whose problem does it solve? And I don't know what Charlie would say about that, what his response might have been back then, but I certainly can ask him today. I think I think it is to learn when there's sort of a conflict of choices, to learn to ask open-ended questions, to get inside it a little more, to get more information before you do any kind of knee-jerk guessing.
Great advice. Whose problem does it solve? And, if it's not solving my problem, well, okay, I got to look at it a little bit differently, and I'm open to helping you solve your problem, but I'm not going to allow you to transfer your problem into my life, unless obviously, when in a family and in a situation, when my mother had a stroke and my dad passed away, her problem, I needed to think about, how can I support her in facing, her problem of being 78, having had a stroke, trying to recover, but having a hard time, losing her husband. And now where is she at? And how do I help? Yeah, I'm willing to bring that problem into my life. And I consciously brought that into my life.
That's so very different. Yeah. And thankfully you had the capacity and the resources and the will to do that. But it is a choice.
You'd be amazed, Lisa, because after we hang up, I'm going to go out there and see my mom walk 9 minutes on the treadmill. It's incredible. She's 83 years old, and she's just 84 now. And just like, it's part of a huge process of recovery from stroke. So for those people that have a family member or a friend who, has had the problem of stroke, never give up. You can always, the challenge is to how to stay positive, throughout the whole thing. So now I want to ask you, what's a resource that you'd recommend for our listeners?
Well, let's see. I think of everything that I've talked about. If they're, you know, conflict resolution, negotiation, um, uh, coaching in the workplace via open-ended questions. All of those are courses that I teach on LinkedIn Learning. So if you're interested in more, just go to LinkedIn Learning and pop in my name, and you'll find the courses that I teach. But also anything else you want to learn relative to any challenge in your life is just get some learning under your belt, whether it's reading, taking courses, in person, doesn't matter. Learn something.
Yep. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have links to that. And I know there's a lot of value in what you're teaching on LinkedIn Live for sure, or LinkedIn Learning. So last question, what's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Well, I'm redoing another one of the courses that I teach and writing a new one. That will capture quite a good part of time. It's like writing a book, for God's sakes, about half the year. And the other half of the year is just becoming a really good chef, baker. I bake bread, I bake all kinds of wonderful things. But I should say, no, my real goal is I've lost 35 pounds and I have 20 more to go. So 25 maybe. So that's actually going to be a tandem goal throughout the year.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on that. And that's an inspiration. And particularly when you talk about bread, I think bread and losing weight, how is...
They don't go together, but they do.
Yeah. Well, there you go. We get some contradictions in today's discussion. Right. Yep. Well, listeners, there you have it. Another story of loss to keep you winning. If you haven't yet joined the Become a Better Investor community, just go to myworstinvestmentever.com right now to claim your spot. As we conclude, Lisa, I want to thank you again for joining our mission. And on behalf of A Stotz Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Oh, no, I just have a big thank you. You have a great heart and a great expertise. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know the audience appreciates your sharing. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth. Fellow risk takers, let's celebrate that today we added one more person to our mission to help 1 million people reduce risk in their lives. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotz, saying, I'll see you on the upside.